Mahomes back, throws. It is incomplete, picked off by the Lions. Brian Branch with it left side. He's gone, baby. He's going to the house. Touchdown, Detroit Lions. Deflected in the air, Branch ran under it, and he took it all the way back. Welcome back to the Twentyman the Huddle podcast presented by Microsoft. And I have in field Yates from ESPN. Thanks for stopping by, Field. You are always a favorite of mine to talk to in the offseason. You kind of have your pulse on everything, which I love, which probably makes you a little bit busy. But the pulse of the NFL. So let's talk about a couple NFL kind of centric topics to begin. The kickoff rule kind of has been talked about. The NFL wants to see more kickoffs. What's your thought on maybe some potential changes coming to the kickoff rule?
I'm a little old school, and I want to see more kickoffs as well. I mean, listen, I don't think I need to preach when I'm talking to a team that just made, I think, Jalen Reeves maybe the highest paid core special teamer ever, right? Like, Lions fans understand that it's a three-phase football game still. So I think the kickoff is good for the NFL. I think it adds an element of unpredictability. I think it adds an element of variance. And I have seen a lot of massive playoff swinging games decided by the kickoff. So, I think back to like whether it's Devin Hester returning the opening kickoff for a touchdown in the Super Bowl, or just Troy Brown way back in the day.
In particular, though, those are such huge plays. A block punt, a key return, just flipping the field late in the fourth quarter.
100%. It's play. I couldn't agree more. And there's a huge chunk of the roster. I mean, usually the special teams coach does not deal with at maximum two position groups. The quarterbacks, because other than maybe the backup holding on field goals and PATs, not going to be involved in special teams, and then occasionally the wide receivers. Although there are some wide receivers that have emerged as some of the best special teamers in the entire NFL. So the Lions special teams coordinator might know more players on an individual level than any other coach, maybe other than Dan Campbell on the team.
100%.
So I'm a little bit of a softie for good special teams action.
One other thing kind of being talked about league-wide, the trade deadline has become a topic. They want to move it back a couple weeks. Totally agree. Why do you think?
It introduces, so here's one of the realities of the NFL is that the trade volume has kicked up, right? A couple of years ago, we saw a very, very busy trade deadline. This past year wasn't quite as busy, but the further into the season you are, the more of an accurate representation of what you think you are or going to be for the rest of that year.
Yeah, good point.
And it allows teams that maybe halfway, or maybe at the trade deadline you're 5-4. You don't know what you are.
Right.
But if it gets moved back 3 weeks and you're 7-4 or 8-4, or you're 5-7 all of a sudden, it allows you a more complete picture, and it allows for more possibilities of trades, which I think, generally speaking, can benefit both sides in a pretty dramatic way.
It's almost like taking the NHL approach, right? Because we're just now starting to talk about the trade deadline in the NHL, and there's 23, 22 games.
Totally, yeah.
Being from Detroit, a team like Detroit, the Red Wings now can say, okay.
Wings are playing some good puck.
It's fun.
It is fun.
We're in a spot now, hey, we can maybe go do it. So similar deal. I agree. I think it makes more sense to be a little bit later. Let teams who think they can go for a run try to make that move.
That's my stance on it. I think that, and I understand at some point you have to draw a line. Like I don't think we need to have a trade deadline after Thanksgiving. But even if you push it back 2 to 2.5 weeks, then you're in business. Teams, I think, have a much better feel for what they are, what they're going to be. And while the NFL is not like where I think the NBA is, where so much of the interest in the NBA is stuff that takes place during the offseason, it does create fan interest. And the NFL has an intended goal of being relevant 365 days a year.
They're pretty good at that, aren't they?
They sure are. More trade certainly goes a long way in doing that.
How surprised were you at the $30 million salary cap hike?
Pleasantly surprised, right?
I bet.
I would say that there's really no down. The only way I was trying to think of winners and losers. And I thought winners, everybody, right? Everybody's a winner, right? I would say specifically players that play either a premium position or guys that are at the top of their own position are in a good spot, because resetting the market is much easier to do when you've got $30 million more to play with. I don't even know if there is a loser. The only one that I could come up with is if competitive balance becomes a little bit of an issue for the NFL, because teams that are already at the top have now been emboldened to make more audacious moves that impact the next couple of seasons. That being said, like, a lot of things still have to happen for teams at the top to stay at the top.
Yeah, because they've got to pay
Well, it's not. Yeah, it's a lot of players still, right? Like the NBA had this cap spike in 2019 that led to the Warriors signing Kevin Durant, and the best team or one of the best teams in the entire league had that much more to sign one player. And in the NBA, one player can tilt the entirety of a franchise. In the NFL, there are some players certainly, but it's not like it's even the best quarterback is not 20% of the players on the field at one time.
Speaking of contracts, important players amongst the best at their position. Amon-Ra St. Brown. Yeah, you know where I was going. Amon-Ra St. Brown is looking for an extension, I think before he goes into next season. What do you think that looks like, and do you consider him among the top 3, 4, 5, the top guys at that position?
Not only do I consider him one of the best wide receivers in the NFL, this might be one of the easiest extension candidates in the league.
I agree 100%.
What more could you possibly ask for out of any draft pick, but much less one that came in the 4th round than Amon-Ra St. Brown, right? Amon-Ra is the definition, I think, of what the Lions want in a player. I'm not sure any player has a better attitude on the field than Amon-Ra. He's unbelievable. He's super talented, obviously, but I think his talent is matched by intangibles that take him to a level that's even greater than his quote-unquote natural talent is, right? I mean, he famously wasn't that fast in the pre-draft process. Hasn't seemed to impact him one bit. The toughness is off the charts, sets the tone for an offense, a big game player who every gotta-have-it situation, you might think they're throwing the football to number 14 and you're probably still not breaking it up. So I don't want to sound super nerdy here, but I'd imagine if Brad Holmes or Mike Disner, who of course does the contracts for the Lions, hears this, they might agree with my assessment here. We, the public, fixate on the average annual value for a contract more than any other metric. Yeah. That's what we care about the most. I would argue that there are a lot of factors that contribute to how you value a contract. So right now, the wide receiver mark is set at $30 million per year on the Tyreek Hill deal with Miami.
Yeah.
4-year, $120 million contract. If you look at that one a little bit closer, it's a 3-year, $75 million deal with $45 million in compensation due to Tyreek Hill in the final year of that contract. Tyreek Hill might be the best receiver in the NFL. That's still a big number for any wide receiver, right? A big number for any player, period. So if you're Amon-Ra, if the goal for Amon-Ra is to get to $31 million per year, there are ways that you can get there. There are also ways that you could say, hey, a 3-year, $77.5 million deal, which is only, if I can do my math quickly, like $27.5 million per season or somewhere in that range, 26, 27, whatever that is, right? That might be a stronger deal or an equally, a very, very strong deal that might also get the job done. Does it make you the highest paid wide receiver on an average annual basis? Technically, no. Does it make you one of the highest paid receivers ever? Yes. So there are a lot of different metrics: 3-year cash flow, guaranteed money, injury guarantees, practical guarantees, things of that nature. So I think the number is big. I think it's $25 million plus per year. I think it's worth it. I think every penny is worth it.
Every penny is worth it. I agree.
And by the way, last thing I'll say about it is that not that I have no reason to believe that they won't do it, but it's an example. It's an example to every player that gets drafted and walks in that building. Doesn't matter if you're taken in the 1st round, 4th round, or undrafted. If you do what it takes to earn your payday, we're going to reward you. I think there's a delicate balance. If a team doesn't reward a player who's done everything that you possibly can in an expedient manner, it leaves other guys saying, what are we going to do?
What are we doing here?
What do we do?
What are we doing here?
What do we do?
Yeah.
So if that guy can't get paid, how can I get paid?
No one deserves it more. I mean, I love the fact that he could rattle off up to 16 guys taken ahead of him. The fact that he is.
I think I had eggs for breakfast this morning, but I can't quite recall.
Field, when you watch his tape and watch him block in the run game, it's so fun. I mean, wide receivers don't stick their head into it like Amon-Ra. Everything that Dan Campbell, you mentioned it, is about.
Yeah.
And what he wants the culture of this team to be about is in number 14.
He's Dan Campbell with football talent on the field, right? Dan obviously was a talented player, played for a while in the NFL, but Dan would be the first to tell you. I saw that combine photo resurface recently, right? Dan was like, the 4.8 tight end, right? Like if he hates me for saying this, I apologize. One of my
on the 1 yard line running off tackle, you want Dan Campbell on your side to help punch that into the end zone.
Dan never ran a 4.5 or whatever. He didn't have the quickness that Amon-Ra has, but he's everything you could possibly want in a Detroit Lions wide receiver.
I'm glad you brought Dan up because the player grades came out yesterday, I believe it was, there were 3 coaches that received an A+ from the players, and these are grades that voted on by the players that cross the gambit of nutrition and facilities and everything. Andy Reid and I think it was Kevin O'Connell with A+, and Dan Campbell.
I'm so glad it happened because I hope that people rethink the way that we evaluate head coaching hires, which I would argue there's no dumber reaction that we do. I know people don't like draft grades sometimes, and hey, believe it or not, sometimes we're wrong, right? Grading coaching hires is so incredibly difficult for so many reasons. It's one thing if someone's been a coach for a long time before and gets rehired after a track record of success, I'm generally going to believe it's a good hire.
Yeah.
But when it's your first time being hired as a head coach on a full-time basis, it's a bit of a mystery here. But so often we just go and find the hot offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator candidate, which, by the way, the Lions had this year in Ben Johnson, right? But if Ben Johnson was hired by a team as a head coach, my rationale for liking Ben Johnson as a hire wouldn't be, he coordinated a great offense. There's a lot more to the job than just that. It would be because when you hear Lions players talk about what has enabled Ben to lead this great offense, it's talking about clear communication, having a plan. Jared feeling emboldened. He feels empowered within the offense. It's belief. It's throwing the football to Penei Sewell or throwing the football. I'm not going to bring up
Taylor Decker
plays, but getting Skip the ball, like doing things like that, right? Those are the traits that matter. So Dan didn't. I don't think Dan was ever a coordinator prior to being hired as a head coach.
No.
Obviously was an interim coach for whatever it was, 13 games filling in for Joe Philbin after he was ousted in Miami, but. And the press conference that was being laughed at and mocked. It's like, all right, so we can have fun with the memes now, but there was like serious blowback at the time.
Yeah, 100%.
And so it's a reality that rather than gravitating towards just the guy that coordinates the great offense or the great defense, let's find leaders. Let's find people that understand how to communicate to players. Let's find coaches that instill a belief. Let's find coaches that have their players situationally prepared. Let's find coaches that believe in process, not just results. Results obviously matter, but if you don't have a process, you're not going to get the results. You find a coach who can handle the tough times. It's easy. I'm not saying it's easy to be a coach in any capacity, but when everything's going great, a lot easier to coach
100%.
than when you hit a rut. Yeah. And the Lions didn't have too many ruts this year, but I'm not like – I remember a year and a half ago, I think they got – I believe it was like week 7 shutout.
Yeah.
Shutout.
Yeah.
Against New England.
In New England, 27-0, I think it was.
To a team that ended up being okay, not great, right? And you're like, damn. What's happening here with this Lions team? Right. Come back, finish the season 7-2 in their last 9 games. Jared goes bananas. You think it's hard or easy being 1-6? Obviously, the answer is very difficult. And I thought that Dan Campbell showed that, yes, it's great when you're winning the division and making the conference championship game. But if you can't endure the difficult times, because more are coming, it's just the way the NFL works, right? You're not going to last. So I was fired up about it. I love Dan. One of my, 5 favorite people in the entire NFL. I've suffered a couple of shoulder injuries running through brick walls for Dan.
Money obviously dictates free agency, but do you think anything like that plays in free agency at all?
Totally. If you don't think guys want to go play with him, of course. Yeah. Now, money is, I will always believe it. And by the way, it's justified. If I were an NFL free agent, I'd probably go where the biggest money offer was. But tie-breaking situations, if you're a guy that's already been around and made some money, you're probably saying to yourself, I want to go play for that guy as opposed to somewhere else where the coach does not have the presence that Dan Campbell does. And Brad Holmes, I don't want to lose track of Brad here because Brad has emerged as this unbelievably brilliant general manager who has presence to him too, right? Like you saw how fired up he was in the elevator after a couple of those games, and you're like, that guy clearly.
They fit together.
They do.
Perfectly. And that's the most important relationship in the building.
Yeah, and by the way, zero prior connection that I'm aware of.
No.
Didn't work together.
Right.
It wasn't like one was handpicked by, the other. Like, to my knowledge, it was we just ran a thorough search. And the GM we felt was best was Brad Holmes. The GM we felt was head coach we felt was best was Dan Campbell. So anyways, I could wax the rest of the day here on the Lions.
All right, well, we are here in Indy for the Combine. I know you just recently on ESPN had your 11 key questions column that you and Matt Miller, who was also on the podcast, and I think
Jordan Reed, Mel Kiper as well.
Yeah, Kiper. Yep. A lot of great stuff in there. Just maybe real quickly, a couple things that you're kind of really focused on, some keys on, some maybe things that made that column that jumped out that you're looking toward as on-field workouts now have kicked off.
Yeah, I'd always say that for the on-field workouts, I've got my I think I'm up to 329 player reports that I've written up so far. So I have a feel for a lot of guys in this class, but it's tiebreaker week for me, right? These guys are wide receiver 5 versus wide receiver 6. One runs slow, one runs fast. It's going to be hard to keep the slow guy ahead of the fast guy, right? Things of that nature. The medicals are so essential on so many players. It's guys like Michael Penix Jr. from Washington. It's guys like Leatu Latu from UCLA. I hope that those guys get a clean medical history or get a clean bill of health, and everybody says there's no issues whatsoever. But the reality is that we've seen guys fall down boards because of what happens here in Indianapolis during this week. So it's tiebreakers. It's medical stuff, and this is not something that I'm going to be privy to every single bit of, but the interviews matter too. I've heard already from people around the NFL this week, players that have wowed and players that have left you saying, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's a program fit, even if the football stuff is really good on tape.
And a lot of people don't realize that that's an important connection there, that the football stuff has to match in the interviews. Dan said he came down here. We talked to him. I'm here for the interviews. That's what I'm here for. The testing, everything else, I can get all that, but I want to sit across from a guy and know if he fits our culture, he fits our style, and I think you can only get that in those meetings.
I don't think it's a coincidence that the Lions took Jack Campbell. I don't think that was we never met the guy. I think it's, as you probably have gathered, you spend 10 seconds around Jack Campbell. And
those shoulders
I get
again?
It. Yeah, exactly. And he's going to become an even better player. He's going to continue to become a big part of that defense. But Coach Shepard and Campbell and all the people involved in that pick, on the coaching staff, I'm sure, and Brad Holmes and his staff, I'm sure interviews are part of the process, and a guy like that being a first-round pick.
100%. Field, great stuff as always.
Thanks for having me on.
I'm going to have you back here, maybe before the draft, definitely before a training camp when we know what this is out.
I can't wait to be there in Detroit.
All right, we're going to have you back on Field Yates from ESPN. Follow him. He's got a pulse on everything on the NFL. Thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate you.
Appreciate you having me on. We'll see you guys in 63 days in Detroit.
I like it.
Not that I'm counting.
You have to wait a little while.
Yeah, no, I'm showing up early. I know. The Lions might not pick till after. It might be the 26th by the time they pick. Yeah.
People are going to be a little sloshed up by the time they pick at 29. But hey, we'll take it.
That's right.
Welcome back to the Twentyman the Huddle podcast. I am very happy to welcome in Lance Zierlein. Does a great job with the NFL. And Lance, how much time do you spend doing those combine profiles? Because they are must-reads for me when I'm looking to do a prospect. You got the strengths, the weaknesses, all the little tidbit stuff. I mean, when do you start that, and how long does that process take leading up to this?
I start it in late October. That's when I feel like I have enough tape to start looking at certain players.
Yeah.
And then I'll wait for quarterbacks until I've got all the tape. So some of the biggest prospects I'm not writing up until December, sometimes into early January. But usually late December, I might not include any of their bowl games or the bowl championship series, but this year I did. So I would say, I've written up 343 prospects so far.
Jeez.
I'll write about 500 total. Quarterback may take me 2.5 hours to get done, 2.5 to 3 hours. A general player is going to take me, a good first or second round talent will take me about an hour and a half to get through the tape and then write the prospects. I've fine-tuned my process where I can get to my information quicker.
Yeah.
And then, a below average player, late round draftable, those guys typically I can find what I need in about 45 to 50 minutes. So I'll work 7 days a week, try to get anywhere from 3 to 5 players done. And then once February rolls around, I'm not only 7 days a week, but I'm going to I do a 3-hour radio show every morning, and then I'll probably put in another 7 or 8 hours on top of that and write 5 to 6 prospects because I have to have all the combine guys done.
Right.
So it's an arduous process from late October to the combine. But after this, I've got, and this sounds funny to people, I've got about 140, 150 more prospects to write in 2 months, which is no big deal. And people, what? Like when you're keeping the pace I am, like 75 a month is like, that's light work.
Well, it does not go unappreciated. Let's just put it that way.
And you know what? I know that, and I know a lot of people are dependent on me because they don't watch fourth-round guards.
Right.
You know? So I know that I can't shortcut my process because I've got a lot of people counting on me to tell them, you know, who the player is and what they look like and what are their strengths and weaknesses. And I don't want to get those wrong.
Yeah.
My projection may miss, my grade may be off, but I want you to get a good feel of who it is that your team has drafted or may draft.
100%. You mentioned strengths and weaknesses. Let's talk about strengths in this draft class. Maybe where are 3 positions where you feel like, okay, there's some good talent, but there's some good depth too. I think teams that are looking for this position are going to be able to find it not only at the top of the draft, but maybe into day 2 and maybe even day 3.
Yeah, wide receiver hits that mark. The top 3 wide receivers are a cut above everyone else. But I think the real strength of this draft is when you get into the second round and third round, day 2. I think you're going to find some good starters, different types. You got some great route runners in there, like with speed, like Ladd McConkey. Pearsall from Florida could not be guarded at Senior Bowl or on tape. Roman Wilson is going to run in a 4.3s here at the Combine, and he's a guy who's really seen his stock rise. Jermaine Burton from Alabama is big, can win, you know, contested catches. So there's a lot of guys that fit whatever you're looking for. We've got it in this Combine. Xavier Worthy is going to run an unbelievable time at University of Texas, but he's about 165 pounds. So, you know, he's the opposite of some of the receivers I talked about. But if you want a wide receiver, day 2 and into day 3 is going to be great for you. I think offensive line, it's rare to see offensive tackles span into the second round with legitimate starting grades, but you do have that, and you have some developmental players like the kid out of Yale who's going to be in this Combine. You have plenty of good centers, decent guards, but really the centers, I think, range into the 4th round with starting grades. And then beside that, I would say that it's light on linebackers, a little light top end on defensive tackles, but pass rush. Pass rush is another one where it's really good in the first round, falls off a little, but then gets a little more broad in terms of, you know, what, depending on what your taste is and edge, what you need.
Yeah.
You can find that, I think, in the 4th and 5th round. You can still find very good backups who have a chance to become eventual starters.
Lance, you're starting to get people in Detroit excited here with the edge rushers and the
my guy,
offensive linemen.
I just want to help AG, man. I'm an Aaron Glenn guy, known him since he was at Houston with the Texans.
Yeah.
Followed him for a long time, and I just want to see that defense become as good as they can. I mean, listen, Detroit is now kind of an America's team situation, right? It was
100%.
Honestly, people who don't have a dog in a fight are like, I'm an AFC South guy. I do radio in Houston, but watching Detroit, and it's not just that I like the Dan Campbell story. It's not just that I like Aaron Glenn personally. I like the redemption arc of Jared Goff.
Yeah.
I like the fact that you drafted one of my favorite linebackers of all time, Malcolm Rodriguez. I like the fact that this is a team built on the offensive line, which is one of my specialties, that you went out and said, we're going to kick people's butt in the trenches. Like, I like that it's the way it's built, and I think they're an easy team to root for.
And it's built for sustained success, too.
Yeah.
When you look at the core players and you look what Brad has been able to do in these last 3 draft cycles, it's been amazing. I want to talk about one guy in particular. You mocked him in your first mock draft, Darius Robinson out of Missouri, a guy that I like. I actually mocked him as well. Why is he a good fit right there at the end of the first round for Detroit?
Well, he can play. So he lost weight going from defensive tackle to defensive end this year. They just needed a defensive end. They were injured at Missouri. So he bounced from D tackle to D end. And, I mean, didn't miss a beat. He was just beat people up off the edge. He is body beautiful, great physical specimen, can play defensive tackle or defensive end. So you can rush him inside as a sub-package rusher on third downs. You can play him outside as a base end who bullies run blockers. And I just think it gives you a nice compliment to what Aiden Hutchinson does. You got a bully of the same stature on the other side. Maybe not the same exact athlete, but I think he's going to test pretty well. And I just like the Dan Campbell mentality of let's go physical. We're trying to physically impose our will the same way we do with our offensive line, and we're going to do it with our defensive front too. And I think one of the best ways to compete for a championship, people get locked up in a lot of different positions. But when you're dominant on your fronts, it makes a job much, much easier. And typically you can find help at corner, at wide receiver, some of the skill positions on day 2 and day 3. So, you know, if you get a special physical specimen like Robinson, who is really on the incline, I say draft the ascending prospect with the great traits.
Yeah, and you gotta love that versatility, right? I mean, he played anywhere from 0 to 9 technique. I think he played maybe every single one in college. And you look at the way Aaron has kind of created some of these sub packages with bumping Aiden inside, and he likes to do some of those things and move guys around. Just seems like a good fit.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Value at 29. Where do you see? The Lions haven't been drafting, this late in a little while. Brad's had top 10 picks heading into the draft in each of his first 3 years. So this is a little different. He talked the other day about just, loving the fact that you have to trust the tape at 29. It's not about getting the sexy, pick and the top 10 guy, but at 29, where do you see value the most if you're Detroit? Now, free agency comes first, so needs are going to change a little bit.
Yeah.
But where's the value at 29?
The value, that's a good question, because every draft has its own flow and lifespan of where prospects go, and I think there's a very definitive one. To me, the value in this draft is going to be the second group of wide receivers: Adonai Mitchell from Texas, Brian Thomas Jr. from LSU. I mean, they may not be on the board, but at that spot, that's where the value is. I think Graham Barton from Duke, who can play center or guard, Jackson Powers Johnson from Oregon, who can play center or guard. These are guys that I would put on the top of my list because those are going to be the value players, guys who have strong, solid first-round grades, who also might fall there depending on if the quarterback push is strong enough to go 5 deep, which I think it will be.
And the Lions have Amon-Ra St. Brown. They have Jamison Williams. But that's still an area of need. They're still looking for a number 3 guy, depending on what free agency does with Josh Reynolds and some of those other guys. But
that's why I think when you look at wide receivers, it's a pick you wouldn't typically make for a team that's not very good. But you can, once you get to a certain level, you can, I thought Jahmyr Gibbs is a really intriguing pick because it was a matchup. It was specifically designed to create stress on defenses with a special matchup. If you now have Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson, so you got a field stretcher, you got your guy who can work from the slot, and now you put someone on the other side that can work all 3 levels. Now you have given, you've given that offense, along with Jahmyr Gibbs and then a bully like Montgomery, you've got an opportunity really to attack anywhere on the field, all 3 levels, with any number of prospects. So that's when you're trying to make that jump and say, we want to win a Super Bowl. You can make a move like that.
All right, last one for me, just the cornerback class, maybe just a quick synopsis, quick rundown. End of first round into day 2, can you find quality starters? Is this a pretty good cornerback class?
I think it is. I think you can find quality starters. You may have to, would the Lions be willing to move up for a corner? That might be what you need to do, because for me, the top 4 or 5 corners, there's a little bit of gap after that.
Okay.
So it might be a situation where you need to move up maybe 3 spots, something like that. But I do think that you can get it. There's going to be a Kool-Aid McKinstry possibly at the end of the first round as one guy to keep an eye on. And it's deep enough that you could let it slide into the second. You could even trade back into the second round if you wanted to. But if I'm the Lions, man, I'm close. Everything I'm doing is really this might be kind of a now draft.
Yeah.
Because Jared Goff's not getting any younger. So it might be a now draft where you make moves that maybe are a little more aggressive as opposed to playing for the future.
Well, they got 4 picks in the top 100. They've got some cap space to deal with, too.
Absolutely.
It should be a fun offseason in Detroit. Great job, as always. Great information.
Appreciate it.
Continue to follow Lance. He does everything for NFL.com. He's got the know on all these prospects. You need to know anything on a guy, go to NFL.com, go to Lance Zierlein. He's got all the information. Thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate it. Welcome to the 20 in the Huddle podcast presented by Microsoft, and we are here in Indianapolis. It is the NFL Scouting Combine, one of my favorite weeks, and joining me is Ben Solak from The Ringer. You guys might know him as the new kid on the block if you read Peter King at all. Yeah. Congratulations on that, by the way. I mean, that's quite the honor, though, Ben, right?
Yeah,
I mean, Peter's been doing this for a long time, and to shout you out as kind of one of those new kids, those up-and-comers coming up for people to read, quite the honor.
And Peter, that's very cool. Peter's also been, helping and providing advice and mentorship like to a lot of young journalists over the past couple of years. And so like that's always cool, but I always want to tell people like Peter's been in the trenches for a lot of young guys, and I got a world of respect for that.
Well, it was certainly a great honor. You are a friend of the podcast. You've been on a few times, so we love having you. Let's just jump right into this. It's a fun time in the NFL, right? We're here in Indianapolis. We're getting ready for the draft, but free agency is before that, so there's going to be a lot going on. Let's start with the Detroit Lions and getting to the NFC Championship game. Obviously, huge season, but when you talk to people in Detroit, they kind of wonder, do they have that staying power? Was this a flash in the pan? I know Brad Holmes was pretty adamant after the season, talking about we've done all this to be a consistently good football team. Does this Detroit team have staying power in your opinion?
They do, yeah. Now, what Dan said after the loss in the NFC Championship game was correct, which is that you can be as good of a team as you were next year relative to last year and not make it back to the NFC Championship game. We start to get to playoff football, 1 bounce, 2 bounces, everybody's banged up, everybody's hurt. We don't play best of 7 series in the playoffs the way the NBA does, and we play best of 1s, right? And so Dan was correct to say, listen, like, it's not guaranteed that just because you're this good next year doesn't mean you get back to this spot next year. That was accurate. But in general, like I remember when Brad and Dan first took the job a few years back, and they were very explicit. Like, we believe a good team is built through the draft, it is built patiently, it is built slowly, it is homegrown. Like, that's how you build a true contender. So now, 3 years later, this is why we built it.
Look at the core pieces.
Like
all guys they drafted.
Yeah. And we're young, and we're cheap, and we're homegrown. We have a culture. We have an understanding of who fits where. Like, this is why we built it this way, not to go get free agents and to get to 9 wins quickly and kind of feel like a little salve, a little band-aid. It was to be legit good for a long time. So yes, I think they do have staying power.
And coaching continuity, I think, plays a part in that too. Ben Johnson back, Aaron Glenn back. You don't see that a lot going into a third season, especially when a team has been as good as Detroit has the last 2 years. How much does that coaching continuity fit into the mix as well? How important is that? Dan talked about it this week down here, just how almost spoiled he feels a little bit having those guys back. But that's a huge part of it too, isn't it, Ben?
It's an enormous deal. Ask the Philadelphia Eagles, last year's NFC champion, or I say 2 years ago now, who then lose both their coordinators and are bad in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Ask the 49ers with their carousel at defensive coordinator, right? Your windows in this league tend to be very small, and it's hard to crack them wider. It's hard to keep them sustained. One of the best ways to do that is to retain coaches, is to have the guys in the building who understand how to make the pieces work. Like Ben Johnson to Jared Goff is the easiest and clearest example. Like, we know that Ben has figured out what works for Jared. We know that Jared trusts Ben. Jared has gotten better over his time here with Ben.
Yeah.
If you took Ben out of the equation, it would be a massive question mark. Not to say it would be bad, but it would be a huge question mark going in. And so, like, the continuity allows you to have reasonable expectations for the team at a high level.
Yeah, I think Dan had a great line down here in Indy when he said, getting all the coordinators back, it's like being able to start at level 401 instead of 101.
Right.
And I think that's a great point for a team coming off an NFC championship to just hit the ground running like you talk about. All right. One of the big contracts that the Lions are probably going to have to figure out here, the most important position in football, Jared Goff. I'm just curious from your perspective, the outside looking in, what do you think a Jared Goff extension looks like if you were to guess on one?
I think he gets $45 million a year. I think he gets it like functionally over 3 years, right? It might be like a 4-year deal, and the 4th year's got no bonus money, and you restructure, yada, yada, whatever. The Daniel Jones contract is a really important contract in the league right now, because every single agent of every single starting quarterback in the league can walk up to a GM and go, we'd like to beat this, please. Because you can make an argument
and
that your quarterback's better than Daniel Jones. That's taking Mickey out of Daniel Jones. It's just he had that great season in a contract year that he switched agents. They got a huge deal out of it, and that's going to become a new floor for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so the idea of Goff getting anything less than 40 to me is just I would laugh that away if I were his agent. Yeah. No, I think it's going to be more in the 45 to 48 per year range. And I think, like you're going to structure this kind of like the Kirk Cousins deal was where when he first joined Minnesota, where you're only kind of on a 3-year horizon because he is getting a little bit older and he's going to get banged up more easily, and you don't want to invest 4 years and 5 years. So I think, if you do, whatever, 138 over 3, like that to me makes sense.
And huge that the salary cap went up as much as it did. It really gives teams like Detroit who are looking to have a couple big contracts, is not only with Jared, Amon-Ra St. Brown is coming due. Mm-hmm. Penei Sewell can get one, but he's got his 5th year option. That's probably 1 more year away. But Detroit's got some big contracts to deal out. And like we talked about off the top, that's a good thing, though. Those are guys, when we're talking about Amon-Ra St. Brown, those are guys that you drafted, developed, and now become some of the best players in the league, deserve those deals deals and you like paying them.
And if you go early on a St. Brown, you go early on a Penei Sewell, and you build out that structure off the end of their rookie deals, you can give them the big deals now, but the hits don't start coming actually until a few years down the road. That's when the big salary numbers come, and that's what allows you to remain aggressive in free agency now, right? And go and land a couple of big fish and try to plug the last remaining gaps on this team. And so it's nice to have that homegrown talent, because when you extend them, you can play with the years and play with the structure a lot more because they're already in the building.
I know we're here at the Combine talking about the draft, but free agency comes first, so I want to ask you a couple things about free agency. What do you think out there is a good free agent fit for Detroit? Is there one name, one position group maybe that you see, boy, that guy just kind of seems like a great fit in Detroit, both for what he brings to the table and what the Lions need?
I circle right guard. I think that's the spot on offense that I would want to improve. You have Kevin Dotson, who was traded from the Steelers to the Rams last year, started really nicely for the Rams. He's on the left side, but started well in the interior for them. I think that Dotson's a good fit for what they do. Mike Onwenu, who's the guard out of New England now, and he's a tackle-sized player, but Detroit likes him big. And Onwenu's played guard in the league and played there successfully. You can bring Onwenu in, and he can start at right guard for you. And both of those guys are solid starters, but not break-the-bank starters. Yeah. And since you're going to break the bank on Decker and on Sewell and on right now, you kind of already have your big money guys. You can go for, I think, a not a lower tier guy, but just like a solid starter, and just feel good about raising the floor of that offensive line. So to me, like I think the interior offensive line market's going to be good in the draft. It's also going to be good in free agency. Yeah. Wouldn't be surprised. You don't want to walk into the draft with a massive gap at right guard and feel like we need to go make a pick there early. You'd rather have a solution in the building, and then if you want to draft a guy, do that as well. And so I think guard is the spot I look at.
When you look at it, is there a better position to address via free agency versus the draft? I know you just talked about guard. They're both in there, but when you look at free agency versus the draft,
100%. Yeah.
What do you look at? Like, what's maybe better in free agency?
Yeah, like I think it's always better to get a safety in free agency than the draft. I think offensive lineman's better for free agency than the draft. You just seen success with those guys changing teams over time, right? Like you can get good safeties, good offensive linemen on the market. If like a wide receiver hits the market, like not a trade guy, but a legit free agent guy or an edge rusher, usually I'm kind of like, those guys don't get away from teams if they're legit, right? And so like barring a Brian Burns Carolina Panthers malpractice, I don't like to kind of go for those positions. I'd rather draft and develop at those spots. I would say like tight end is another spot where you love to go get a free agent instead of draft a guy, because usually the rookie tight ends aren't good. But you can't say that on a Detroit Lions podcast. They already proved you wrong on that one. And so it's like corner is a spot as well. If a corner makes it to the market, usually there's a reason he made it, and you're more likely, I think, if you're swinging for like a really top tier guy, to kind of do so successfully in the draft. L'Jarius Sneed here being a perfect example. Like if L'Jarius Sneed made it to market, Brad Holmes should have walked up to Sneed's agent with the biggest blankest check you ever doggone saw. But the Chiefs have explicitly said, like, hey, we're going to tag this guy. We're not going to let him get to the market because that's the caliber of player that he is. And so
trade potential still there, I heard
I would trade a first for L'Jarius Sneed, but that's why I'm not a general manager. So I'm an irresponsible man who would just send picks for good players.
The fan perspective, I love it. Yeah. A little bit of fandom there. The NFC North, let's get into that a little bit. Obviously, a lot going on. The number one pick was Chicago. They've got to decide what they want to do with Justin Fields and Caleb Williams. It sounds to me they're leaning toward Caleb Williams. I think that's the right move. You can reset that quarterback position with the rookie deal. Minnesota's got to figure out what they're going to do at quarterback as well. Green Bay looks like that team, like Detroit, maybe at the end of 2022 when they had some young pieces that were coming together, playing a lot better. Just your expectations for the NFC North. To me, it looks like a division that's going to be much, much improved and a much harder road for Detroit to repeat in 24.
All of those teams feel like they're at least 500 or better. And that's with like the Bears making a potential quarterback change, right? Like they finished just under 500 and they had such a strong end of the season. I think the Packers are, won a playoff game. Clearly the team expected to be over 500. The Vikings maybe like a little bit of a question mark because what if they don't bring Kirk back? But there's pieces like on that defense. Brian Flores returns. There's Justin Jefferson healthy and TJ Hawkinson hopefully healthy. Like, they still got guys. Everybody to me feels like 9-8 and up, right, in terms of expectation. So now it becomes, do you win your divisional games? Do you win your road games? Are you able to secure that division? I think this is going to be, it's going to be week 14, 15. Nobody's going to be near securing this division. And if you made me pick a team to win it, I would pick Detroit. I think they're the best team in the division. But a lot's going to happen between now and then. So absolutely, the AFC North and the American Conference and the NFC North and the National Conference too. Those are the best divisions in the league right now.
All right, we are at the Combine, so I would be a little bit remiss if I didn't ask you about the draft. And let's start with this. Brad Holmes, can he continue this pace of hitting on guys in all 3 days? You look at his draft picks. I mean, it's 75%, 80% in terms of hits on guys playing. Can he keep this up?
Absolutely not, and no chance. And that's why it's very important to understand. I think that Brad does, given his comments yesterday, that when you hit like this, boy, you better make it count. You got to make it worth it, right? You have to hit. I always go back to the Chris Ballard Indianapolis Colts, late 2010s, right? They had their Quentin Nelson, Darius Leonard draft. It's unbelievable. And Braden Smith in the 3rd round. They're pulling cats out of Kenny Moore. They're drafting unbelievably. And Ballard and the Colts just kept recycling at quarterback, and they never fully went all in. They never committed. And then by the time they started to figure quarterback out, all those guys were on their 2nd contract. They were getting hurt. They were getting old. When you strike iron and it's hot, you got to go. This is the league. It is not for long. You got to attack. And so, yes, like Gibbs, Laporta, Branch, Hutchinson, St. Brown, Sewell, you have this young core.
It's ridiculous.
Spend, attack, trade, go, right? And if Goff is your quarterback and you feel like you have the guy like long term, you've secured the most important position, go get everybody you can, right? They should be calling the Bengals about T. Higgins, calling the Niners about Brandon Ayuk, calling the Chiefs about L'Jarius Sneed, call anybody who's got anybody about anybody who might be anybody. This is the time to go on. This is the time to attack. We'll see, right? Because
this is their window, you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that they know that. I think that they get that. But also I think they understand that academically. But when you've drafted and built and been as good as a culture team as they've been over the last few years, sometimes it's hard to accept the reality of like, all right, we got to go get some big stars. And so we'll see how they behave. I'm really hoping that they, ramp things up to an 11 a little bit.
About $55 million roughly in cap space. They've got cap money to deal with. They got 4 picks in the top 100. It should be a really fun free agency. It should be a really fun draft. He is Ben Solak. He is one of the new kids on the block, as Peter King says, but a very good friend of the podcast, very well respected. You do a great job with the Ringer. Thank you so much, Ben, for joining me.
Appreciate
always.
It.
Welcome back to the Twentyman the Huddle podcast. I am very happy to welcome in Matt Miller. Just such a great job with ESPN. The Bleacher Report before that. Matt, is this when it kind of starts to become real for you? I know you've been evaluating these guys for months, but now everybody's here in one spot. It's all about the draft. Is this when it kind of starts to become a little bit more real for you?
Absolutely. And it's when the rest of the league takes notice of the draft. We've been waiting for months to talk about these guys, and now it's like everyone else is able to do that. Y'all had such a great season. You had such a long run through the playoffs. You're not thinking about the draft. You're worried about the 49ers.
Yeah.
So it's like, this is, I think, when you get all 32 fan bases. Like you mentioned when I was at Bleacher Report, we used to have a joke of like, as soon as the Browns are out of the playoffs, that's draft season for at least one team,
right.
And then everyone else followed suit. And now this is the time when all 32 teams are focused on this.
And it's such a crazy schedule in the NFL because we all come here, we do this, and then we immediately focus on free agency. And almost it gets put to the back burner again. The free agency goes, and then, teams are having the visits and everything else goes, and then it gets into draft mode again. But it's a weird dichotomy of the NFL schedule.
It is. And, the NFL is great at keeping us interested in everything they do. So, but also, like, as you know, what happens behind the scenes here is so important. And it is the unofficial start of free agency, even though, we don't like to talk about that fact that a lot of deals are getting done here and interest being shared. So it is, it'll be a nice little break for me after here while all my colleagues are covering free agency. I can step back and kind of revisit the
Take a breath.
That too, yeah.
All right, you recently updated your top 50. Just maybe give me a quick synopsis. Where's this draft you think strong? What position-wise do you think it's strong? Where a team's going to be able to get some immediate impact?
Yeah, wide receiver every year, right? Every year wide receivers deep.
That's just the way the college game has become.
Absolutely,
now, right? I mean, it's transitioned so easily now.
Yeah, and so wide receiver's great. Corner is great, which very interesting for Detroit.
People happy in Detroit there.
And I offensive tackle, which you're very good there at offensive tackle, but it is the deep class, and a lot of those guys could potentially be guards. Some of them could even play center. So it is. Those are the 3 core positions. I think we're going to see a lot of really good players.
I'm glad you mentioned that because it's something I wanted to ask. Everybody knows kind of who the guard and center guys are, the names, but I don't think a lot of maybe fans know of some tackles that are projected to play guards or some tackles that you could see play guard. That's obviously a need depending on what happens in free agency for Detroit. But maybe who are one of the 2 of those guys that are tackles right now, but you could see them playing guard and maybe Lions fans should know their name just in case that's kind of where it ends up to begin their career in Detroit.
Washington's left tackle, Troy Fatano.
Okay.
Not short-armed, but shorter, and that's probably going to kick him inside. Graham Barton from Duke, left tackle, going to get kicked inside. I think Jordan Morgan from Arizona, another guy who college left tackle, but could get kicked inside. So, and they're, interestingly enough, their range is right there in the mid to late 20s. So the value would be right if that's the direction Detroit went.
And do you see teams value those kind of guys more too, just because injury, it's not a matter of, if injuries are going to happen, it's when. And to have a guy that's not only versatile to play all three interior spots, but in a bind can go play, tackle
Absolutely.
if needed to in game. We've seen some of those situations with Detroit before where they've had to have a guard play tackle, and teams love that kind of flexibility.
Yeah, or
they?
even, hey, Penei Sewell needs to play left tackle. Okay, well, he can do both. That's great. But yeah, I mean, you can only carry so many guys on your roster. So I think that's where it's huge to say, okay, well, we're drafting you. You were a college left tackle. We're going to move you to guard. But in a pinch, we know you could play left tackle, and it's not going to be that huge transition, or we're not going to have to dedicate a lot of practice time to it. We're going to be able to get you back out there and have you do that. And, teams like Green Bay have made a living, and the Philadelphia Eagles as well, they made a living off drafting linemen who are versatile just for those reasons.
All right, let's get into your mock draft a little bit. First pick at 29, Leatu Latu, the defensive end out of UCLA. You're one of the few guys I think that has him going back that far. Is that just because of what you see with the quarterbacks and the skill guys really dominating the first, or is there something about him, or how do you think he gets to that spot with Detroit at 29?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. He has been a fantastic player the last 2 years at UCLA.
Yeah. Prior
to that, he had to medically retire at Washington because of a neck injury. So it's a situation, if you remember, similar to Jalen Phillips, who was at UCLA, retired, went to Miami, and became a first-round pick. So this week is huge for Latu with the medicals. Also, someone who's not going to test exceptionally well. He's just a really, really good football player. He's a technician. He looks like a seasoned pro playing defensive end. So I think that's the reason for the slip in that mock draft. But those medical questions could get answered this week, and he could go in the top 15.
I think Lions fans would love it if he's sitting there just based off the tape and what the players and how he fits the scheme and that Dan Campbell kind of mantra as well. Yep. And then in the second round, you had them going a cornerback, TJ Tampa. What do you like about him?
Yeah, physical, feisty. You mentioned, I'm glad you said Dan Campbell mentality of you want somebody who's going to be a little bit of a nuisance for offenses. That's who he is. And I think especially in the playoff run, I was so impressed by Detroit, but every time I watched it was like, man, I would love to get one more corner in there, at least one more young corner in there. And Tampa not only fits the scheme, but, in the second round, I think he's a starting caliber player that's actually available just in the late second round.
At least on my next question, the cornerback class, are there going to be guys late in today too that you think teams are going to be able to snag and can be guys that can compete for starting jobs?
Yeah, and we'll see where the run happens. If 6 or 7 go in the first round, that's going to change things. But I loved Jarvis Brownlee from Louisville at the Senior Bowl. He had such a great week, and I'm watching him. I'm looking at my rankings. I'm like, this could be a third round player who's going to play in the NFL a lot. Mike Sainristil from Michigan. Yeah, he's going to be a nickel, but he's going to play 70% of the time, and because he's a little bit smaller, probably going to be a third round pick.
Where do you see value at 29 when you're Detroit? It's a weird spot to be, because the last 3 years with Brad Holmes, he's had a top 10 pick going into it, but he's at 29 now. Where's the value for him?
Yeah, I think it could be offensive line. I really do, just because we might see 2 tackles in the top 10. We might see 1, and that's going to push really talented players down. And as we mentioned, some of these guys. Even J.C. Latham from Alabama, he could play guard in the NFL and be a really, really good one. So you obviously you guys are great at tackle, but I think when you look at the interior, that's where you can maybe find great value.
What about this edge class? What do you like about it overall?
Yeah, overall, I think you have a lot of athletes. Got Dallas Turner from Alabama, Chop Robinson from Penn State. Maybe they're not the most well-rounded guys, but they're going to give you that speed, especially opposite Aiden Hutchinson, who's just such a game wrecker.
Things easier for a lot of people, doesn't it?
I think I could probably get a sack lining up opposite him. He's that good. So, and then, defensive tackle, there could be really good value at 29 as well, because, again, we could be looking at a spot where only one, like Byron Murphy, has come off the board. Maybe Jerzon Newton from Illinois might be there. T'Vondre Sweat, is more of a true nose tackle, but even putting a nose tackle next to Aiden Hutchinson is going to create a lot of problems.
And Lee McNeil, putting that kind of size next to Lee McNeil, and Aiden Hutchinson, let them work a little bit. That'd be interesting. All right, final one for me. Brad Holmes has been so terrific in his first 3 draft cycles.
Yeah.
Can he keep this up? Because he's really hit. I mean, Matt, it's been 80-90% of the guys that he's drafted have become quality guys that contribute. Yeah, if not right away, in year 2 and 3.
So I do think he can keep it up because he's a very good scout. I will say it's a little easier when you're in the top 10 than it is at 29.
Here's the
thing. It's also easier when you have a roster that's developing. Now you're a team that had a lead in the NFC Championship game. That roster doesn't have as many holes as it had 2 years ago because of how good of a job Brad has done. So, yeah, he can keep it up. And I love that he is just bucking trends and saying, we've got a foundation built. We'll take a running back in the first round, and he's going to be a huge playmaker for us. Or we'll take an off-ball linebacker in the first round. And it helps when you can find a Brian Branch in round 2. So, yeah, they've done a great job. I'm in awe of how well they've built this team.
Yeah, it should be a fun couple weeks leading in. I know you're a busy man. You can check everything that Matt Miller does on ESPN. Does a great job with their draft coverage there. Matt, thanks for taking the time. Appreciate you.
Of course. Thanks.